Good evening, I'm Neil Kirksall. Adrienne and Andrew are away this week. Tonight, a Christmas Eve plea to stay home for the holidays.
Every time you take a trip, it puts people in jeopardy.
The message comes from politicians, health officials, and those who have seen the effects of COVID firsthand.
I would never want what happened to my father to happen to another human being.
The big question, will Canadians listen? Also tonight, BC bends its curve, how they did it again.
I think our province has done a great job.
What the experts say the province is getting right. And
it's an unprecedented situation. We are living in unprecedented times, and you've had to make unprecedented sacrifices.
You can say that again. At Issue is here with their special year-end edition to talk about, well,
we are in an unprecedented global pandemic.
Plus finding ways to say thanks to those who've given so much. This is The National. Christmas morning is almost here. For those who celebrate, it is the high point of this season of hope. But in 2020, hope can be harder to find. Celebrating the way people are used to is not safe. Once again, Canadians are being asked to stay the course.
My friends, this crisis will end. And as a country, we will come out of it stronger and more united. So today and into the new year, let's continue to stand together.
But other messages today are driven by caution and concern about the second wave. Stay home, don't gather. Across Canada, more than 6,800 new cases as two big provinces again hit new records, and holiday travel threatens a nasty new year. So starting Christmas Day, Quebec locks down. A day later, so does Ontario. Magda Gabrisalassi spoke to people across the country with a stake in the crisis and who hope people will follow the rules.
So definitely more of an emptier holiday season.
Facing every day without her father is a struggle for Terina Rodriguez.
A lot of plans that don't get to happen now because he's not here.
Her father, Leonard, was a personal support worker in Toronto. He tested positive for COVID in April and died at home in May.
And I said to him,
now seeing others ignore COVID safety measures fills her with frustration.
You shouldn't wait until it happens to you before you act on it. We should be passionate enough as humans to say, I don't want this for the next person. I would never want what happened to my father to happen to another human being.
I know the lockdown starts on December 26. Please, stay at home when you can.
The Ontario Premier has been accused of starting his lockdown too late. As he made his plea, his province broke another record, more than 2,400 new cases. In Quebec, too, a new daily high of 2,349.
There's a very real concern that we might see a surge of cases in January if people do what they've done during previous holidays, which is gather together and celebrate.
It will all land on the front lines. Paramedic David Leary in Surrey, BC, is working over the holidays.
It's been very, very busy. It's relentless. On top of the pandemic, we're also dealing with an opiate crisis, too.
He hopes everyone will do their part by following the rules. Non-essential air travel is not against the rules.
We said we're going to go.
Snowbird Perry Cohen decided to head to his Florida home.
In our community, it's safe. So we would go either way unless the government said everything is totally shut down. Nobody goes.
Despite the pandemic, Magda, still a fair number of people are flying, including within this country. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's right. Not everyone is shying away from traveling right now. We know, in fact, just yesterday, more than 31,000 Canadians were heading to the airport to get on a flight. So health officials' worst fears of a surge of new cases in the new year could come to fruition as people gather for the holidays. No.
Magda Gabrisalassi in Toronto tonight. Thanks for this, Magda.
You're welcome.
So there's just a day now to go before Ontario's province-wide lockdown. Officials in Ottawa are hoping Doug Ford will reconsider.
Why does Northern Ontario get a 2-week shutdown and the rest of us, particularly Ottawa, that has very low numbers, gets a 28-day lockdown?
Mayor Jim Watson, his health team, even Liberal MP Catherine McKenna say Ottawa's lockdown should be just 2 weeks, like in Northern Ontario, pointing to low infection rates and empty ICUs. But as Olivia Stefanovich reports, businesses are bracing for disruption all the same.
All right, and can I just get your name?
Catherine.
Catherine, there you go.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, thank you.
While other store owners are closing up entirely, Gareth Davies has figured out how to stay open.
We were actually already closed in store for the last month, so there's no immediate change for us.
Before the holiday rush, Davies decided to focus exclusively on online orders, a gamble that's paying off ahead of new restrictions. But adapting to closures hasn't been as easy for other businesses.
Everything's cleaned up, and in 4 weeks, we'll have to restock everything again.
Restaurateur Joe Catronio tried to shift to an all-takeout business model during the first lockdown, but couldn't pay the bills.
I mean, it's been devastating.
Now he's laid off all his staff again.
COVID will stop killing people or slowing down, and the economy will start killing people if it doesn't pick up.
COVID-19 spiked in the fall, but recently the capital has kept case counts relatively low.
Some people say this is a case of privilege more than luck.
This epidemiologist says many Ottawans can work from home. The city is not a major travel hub and doesn't have a lot of apartment housing or overly crowded transit systems.
I think we are better positioned to handle a bump now than we were a couple of weeks ago. Now the ICU beds are empty. But what we don't have is the capacity to magically create more healthcare workers.
That's part of the reason why the province is keeping the capital under the full 28-day lockdown, at least for now. The Premier also says he's worried about spread from Quebec, though health officials have pushed back, saying Gatineau's infection rate is lower than Ottawa's. Ontario's chief medical officer is tracking the data and will recommend adjustments as necessary. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Alberta spent the first half of the month staring down a surge in new cases. Now there are signs of a slowdown. The province is posting modified updates over the holidays. Today, reporting an estimated 1,100 new infections. That's the second lowest figure in 10 days. Health officials say hospitalizations are up, though. ICU admissions are stable. Well, yesterday, British Columbia said it was bending the curve, quote, slightly. Today, a slight uptick with 582 new infections reported. That's still well below the high numbers, though, seen earlier this month. It has put the province in an enviable position. So how has it managed to do it again? Susanna De Silva takes a look.
Pandemic or not, some Christmas traditions endure.
Just some last minute stuff, I guess, just kid stuff, yeah.
Do you normally wait till the 24th, or is that a tradition for you?
For me, yes.
It's also a year for some new ones.
People have actually said, I'm having a Zoom party, so they want their hair to look good for that.
My mom does this every year, and so I thought, why not do it myself this year? It's been a stressful year, so this is how I relax.
Businesses and customers in BC are grateful these are even options.
If we're shut down during the busiest time of our year, it's very hard to pay rent. So, it's big. I think our province has done a great job.
Stores and restaurants remain open. Some fitness activities have resumed. Even ski hills are welcoming visitors, all while officials say BC's numbers are headed in the right direction.
As you can see, we have bent our curve slightly, and we're now perhaps on a downward trajectory.
Dr. Henry says diligent contact tracing has let them know exactly where to target restrictions, including banning in-person religious services and indoor and outdoor gatherings with anyone outside your household since mid-November.
There was a clear break sometime around November 15th. And so that was the combination of the restrictions on social gatherings and the mask restrictions could account for that.
But this professor says the current decline is still slow, and it could be a month or two before healthcare workers and contact tracers are fully caught up. And of course, the big worry, Christmas.
It's always on a knife edge, and here in BC I do worry that we might get overzealous in our holiday partying and the numbers might turn back up.
Though most say they will follow the rules.
Just quiet, me and my boyfriend. I'm probably just going to be making a dinner by ourselves and just hanging out and just calling my family from home.
The question will be whether in January the downward trend continues. Susanna Da Silva, CBC News, Vancouver.
A second mink farm in BC's Fraser Valley is under quarantine. 3 mink that died tested positive for the virus that causes COVID-19 in humans. Now, earlier this month, workers and animals tested positive at a separate farm where 200 mink died. So all mink farms in BC are under enhanced surveillance. There have been multiple outbreaks at mink farms in Europe and the United States. A day after securing approval from Health Canada, the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine has arrived in this country. Canada Border Services agents met the FedEx flight from Paris. The shipment contains a portion of the 168,000 doses expected to arrive before the end of the year. It will be the first vaccine deployed to the territories. It's easier to ship than the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which is the only other shot approved for use in Canada. After the first wave of people get a shot, there are some who say they should be next in line. Paramedics in Alberta tell our Rafi Bujikanian they can't understand why they are not on the priority list already when the virus makes their jobs particularly dangerous.
Paramedics face challenging situations.
You're constantly changing different environments. You're going from someone's house outside to the back of an ambulance where that's a confined place.
This respiratory therapist was the first Albertan to get a COVID-19 vaccine. But paramedics say they do the same kind of work, sometimes outside.
PPE is not as effective for us in that changing environments, right? You take -30, wearing a gown, what do you do, right? If you're outside, do you wear a jacket? Can that gown go over top of your jacket, or do you have to put that jacket over top of your gown? If you do that, now your jacket is contaminated.
Alberta has made public its priority list for who gets vaccinated first. Paramedics are not on it.
Who stands to be at highest risk of severe COVID disease and death? And then what groups who are in, essential worker positions.
This infectious disease specialist says distributing the shots is tricky while doses are limited, but she can see why paramedics should be a priority.
Because I would definitely support paramedics as being in line faster than me, honestly, because when I see COVID patients, I'm seeing them usually well into their illness and in a controlled setting.
Asked when paramedics could get the shot, Alberta Public Health offered no clarity.
I anticipate that decisions around those groups in phase 2 will be made at some point early in the new year.
For paramedics, that can't come soon enough. Rafi Bujikanian, CBC News, Edmonton.
France has sent 10,000 rapid COVID tests along with 24 firefighters to the English port of Dover. They're testing truck drivers who've been stuck after France closed its border in reaction to a new variant strain of coronavirus that's been spreading in the UK. Both countries have agreed to keep the crossing open over Christmas so that drivers and travelers can get home for the holidays. The UK broke through another obstacle today. It secured a trade deal with the EU. It comes 4.5 years after Britons voted to leave. Farah Morali has the reaction now from London.
We've taken back control of our laws and our destiny.
This is the final act of the Brexit saga. After months of face-to-face meetings and fierce talks between negotiators on both sides, a trade deal is done.
I think this deal means a new stability and a new certainty in what has sometimes been a fractious and difficult relationship.
While the UK Prime Minister says the deal delivers on everything he promised to the British public, the EU maintains it protects its interests too.
It was a long and winding road, but we have got a good deal to show for it.
One of the final sticking points in negotiations, fishing. Specifically, access European boats would have to UK waters. Just last week, both sides were reportedly oceans apart, a distance that was bridged in recent days.
9 months of COVID, plus waiting, day by day for this whole Brexit scenario.
The deal is a relief for many UK businesses. 70% of the goods from this cheese shop are imported from the EU. They'd be slapped with tariffs if no deal was reached.
For us, a no deal would mean an instant hike in prices.
The UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Today's historic deal comes 4.5 years after Britain's vote to leave the EU. It has been a long and acrimonious journey, one with many missed deadlines. The deal brings a measure of certainty after years of turmoil.
So I think, a failure of these negotiations, acrimony on both sides, would have been very destructive, and that's what's been avoided by this deal today.
Though the deal is done, it still needs to be ratified by both the UK and EU parliaments. That must happen by December 31st, meaning both sides have just a few days to comb through thousands of pages of the fine details. But for tonight, a sense of relief here at 10 Downing Street. Farah Morali, CBC News, London.
There is another deal that remains on hold tonight, the one that is meant to deliver COVID relief to Americans. While the U.S. president waits for Congress to make its next move, several members are fuming over Donald Trump's latest act of Christmas clemency. Derek Stoffel has the latest.
As the COVID pandemic rages, President Donald Trump is spending the holidays in Florida at his golf course. But he had time last night to hand out early Christmas gifts to dozens of allies and loyalists in the form of controversial presidential pardons.
Donald Trump doesn't surprise us anymore. What he does is always and only in his self-interest. And so he is rewarding people who he regarded as being useful to him.
The pardons angered some in Trump's own party. This is rotten to the core, said Republican Senator Ben Sasse. The president pardoned Charles Kushner, the father of Trump's son-in-law and advisor, Jared Kushner. He served 2 years in prison for tax evasion and retaliating against a federal witness. 2 other pardons came as no surprise.
I've always found Paul Manafort to be a very decent man.
Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign chairman, served nearly 2 years in prison for financial crimes relating to work he did in the former Soviet Union. Roger Stone was on his way to jail for lying to Congress during the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election. Trump commuted his sentence back in July.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me the offer.
Trump has now given Stone a full pardon. Wiping away those convictions is a clear shot at Robert Mueller, the special counsel whose investigation Trump has long denounced as a hoax.
The president, one by one, wants to eliminate those who would provide testimony in other settings to get to the truth of what happened with the Russian investigation.
And Derek, Donald Trump has not only left the White House, he's also left millions of people waiting for COVID relief.
That's right, Neil. Trump is away on holiday, but there are ongoing efforts here in Washington to try to increase the COVID assistance that's being paid out to Americans, raising it from checks of $600 to $2,000 for most people. But Republicans have blocked that effort, and that means for Americans who desperately need that financial assistance, they'll have to keep on waiting until after the holidays.
The CBC's Derek Stoffel in Washington. Thanks, Derek.
You're welcome.
The 2 Canadians detained in China are spending their 3rd Christmas behind bars. Sarah Levitt tells us about a moving holiday campaign trying to make Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor feel less alone, while also urging China to show mercy.
All Canadians are concerned for you.
Margaret McQuaig Johnston can't help but get emotional reading the Christmas card she sent to Michael Kovrig.
We will welcome you home with open arms. Actually, I don't want to start to cry when I read these things because these are really heartfelt.
McQuaig Johnston is just one of many Canadians and others abroad sending Christmas cards to Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Twitter shows the fruits of their labor. The hashtag Free China Hostages, their rallying cry. Kovrig and Spavor were arrested in China in December 2018, accused of spying. Their arrests followed Canada's detention of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou at the request of the U.S. Department of Justice.
The espionage accusations are complete rubbish.
Charlie Parton started this Christmas card campaign. A friend of Kovrig, he wants the men to know they have people fighting for them. He also wants to get the attention of Chinese officials.
I just hope that if the reaction is broad enough, and that the Communist Party itself will see that taking hostages is just not a winning strategy.
I hope you know that you are not forgotten, that by doing this, China has shredded decades of goodwill and respect from Canadians.
Across the country, letter writers hope the message is heard.
We're normal people. We don't have huge networks, so I'm appealing to those huge Canadian superstars, especially, in the entertainment industry, the Celine Dion's and the Drakes.
Parton hopes increased interest around the world might mean good news for his friend.
One hopes that next year in 2021, Michael will have an altogether different and happier Christmas than he's going to have this year.
Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Toronto.
A development for hockey fans today. The NHL says it believes the league meets public health requirements for Canada's 7 teams to kick off their season next month. A league official says, quote, "We believe we are aligned and in agreement on the conditions on which each of our Canadian franchises can begin play in their own buildings." The league has created an all-Canadian division amid the pandemic. Provincial health officials have not confirmed the start to play yet. The season is set to start in mid-January. You might have a tech update on your holiday wish list.
E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream.
Up next, the environmental effect of those constant upgrades and the push to make technology greener. Plus, at issue on an unprecedented year in politics and the political stories that flew under the radar. And later, finding the right holiday note in 2020. We're back in just 2 minutes. Well, welcome back. If a new piece of technology is on your Christmas wish list, you are not alone. Smartphones and tablets continue to top holiday gift guides. Big tech companies are happy to have you buy more and more, but electronic waste is piling up. Tashana Reed shows us how some innovators are trying to fix that.
I'm always walking to the same old place, just in case.
New screens, better cameras, faster operating systems. Each year, tech companies entice consumers to upgrade their devices. But it comes at a cost, and not just financially.
We have an industry that hasn't really come together to think about how we can prolong the life of these devices, and also that they have a big impact in their production on the environment.
From the mining of precious metals and minerals needed to create batteries, screens, and cases, to the e-waste left behind. The toll is immense. In 2019 alone, more than 11 million tons of personal electronics ended up in landfills.
E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream.
Dutch company Fairphone is trying to change that by building phones to last longer.
We want to develop products that people can enjoy for as long as possible so that we can lower those CO2 emissions per user and per year.
It's created a modular smartphone that comes with a screwdriver. Hardware changes or camera upgrades can be done by the customer.
They can send us back the old camera as well, so we make sure that we are able to reuse it if possible and otherwise recycle it.
This is my new screen, and I could replace it within minutes all by myself.
They're only sold in Europe, but Canadian Carolyn Aubry bought one 5 years ago.
They just don't build it to have to throw it out. So I don't know. I'm willing to take the challenge and just own it for as long as I possibly can.
At the University of Toronto, researchers are busy developing green technology to recycle precious metals from discarded e-waste.
Resources are depleting as we consume more and more. Therefore, it's highly desirable nowadays to find secondary resources for these elements.
Still, it's years away from industrial use. For now, experts say one thing consumers can do is think twice about that upgrade. Tashana Reed, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, still to come for you, bringing a little cheer to the heroes of 2020. A special delivery to frontline workers from some hard-hit businesses. But first, At Issue looks back on the busy political year that was and the challenges ahead in 2021.
This is, of course, an unprecedented situation. These are unprecedented times. We are in an unprecedented crisis. It's an unprecedented situation. We are living in unprecedented times, and you've had to make unprecedented sacrifices. It is also an unprecedented opportunity. Unprecedented investments in healthcare, unprecedented direct support to Canadians. We are in an unprecedented global pandemic that really sucks.
Well, I think we can all agree it has been an unprecedented year. Who better to look back on the political year that was and perhaps ahead to 2021 than at issue? Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj all here for our holiday tradition that I'm sorry we are not doing in person. It is usually the one time a year that I see you all, so obviously the pandemic's keeping us apart. Let's focus the first part on the pandemic. Let me start by asking all of you just sort of quickly how you would describe the federal government's response to the pandemic. I'll start with you, Althea.
I guess you could say unprecedented, but I'm not going to. I'd say slow to start and then rushed. I think it's very clear that the government was caught flat-footed. The Prime Minister announced just before Christmas that he, in fact, didn't realize how serious COVID-19 was until early March, when his wife caught the disease. And then rushed in terms of delivering help to Canadians. They clearly did not think things through, and then rushed to get vaccines. So, rush is not always a bad thing.
Chantal.
To go back to unprecedented, as it is the word of the evening, I've covered a lot of governments that have had a crisis thrown their way that they didn't see coming, a unity crisis in the case of Jean Chrétien, 9/11, the global financial crisis. This is of a completely different magnitude, and it is unprecedented. Up to a point, I would say one of the strengths of the government's response has been the fact that Justin Trudeau and the premiers, not just him, have managed in public to mostly sing from the same hymn book. I think that really mattered. That we did not have the kind of divisions that we have witnessed in the United States. Whether it made a huge difference, possibly, probably, but I think it made Canadians feel more secure to hear the Prime Minister and the Premier of Ontario, people who do not normally get along, speak in the same voice about the issue.
How would you characterize their response, Andrew?
I think I would distinguish between the management of the public health crisis versus the social and economic crisis that resulted from that. The first was confused and late and slow, and I did not think it was terribly well handled at all. And it made them have to really scramble and improvise on the economic response to that. I think they improvised rather well. I think the worst criticism you can make a lot of these programs is it was kind of overkill, that it wound up with people actually having higher incomes than before. They overcompensated people in terms of their loss of income. So if they'd had more time, if they'd been better prepared on the public health front, maybe they would have done a better job on the economic and income support file. But as I say, given the conditions they were in, given the degree to which they were forced to scramble, I think they improvised well.
What was the biggest political lesson learned, do you think, from the pandemic, or the political legacy maybe that you hope would come out of this, Althea?
For me, I think the lesson I learned is that big things can happen if governments really want to make them happen. We're often told that, the bureaucracy moves at a snail's pace. And the reason that, there's no childcare is because it's really hard to accomplish. Well, big things can happen very quickly if the government sets its mind to it. And so I think that if there's public pressure for the government to do something, it will do it, and it can do so very quickly.
Yep, that's a good one. The government probably learned that lesson too. Chantal, same to you.
And same lesson. Things that most of us who cover federal politics or provincial politics would have not believed possible, to churn out programs at the pace that they were churned out, to get vaccine approval in a timely manner. It kind of defeats this notion that everything has to go very slowly and change never happens. It's going to be harder for governments in the future after this to argue that it's going to take time, more than one mandate, possibly more than their own life in government, to get anything done. And that may explain why suddenly people are surprised that there are like announcements on climate change that are suddenly decisive. It may be that maybe the government itself has realized that it's like watching TV series these days compared to 1960.
Right.
Everything happens faster.
Yeah, and you don't have to wait till the
interesting.
next week to find out how it ended. Same to you, Andrew, in terms of lessons or political legacies.
I think there are two contending lessons. The one that a lot of people want to draw is that the lesson of this is that we were too globalized, we're too exposed, supply chains were too stretched. We need to onshore capacity, we need to be more resilient, we need to build in more redundancy. I think that's the wrong lesson. I think the right lesson is be prepared. If we had better early warning systems, if we'd stockpiled equipment, if we'd had better advice on masks and on testing, et cetera, if we would have done a better job in this pandemic, and we'll be able to do a better job in future pandemics, such that we don't need to avoid globalization. We can still buy masks, et cetera, in the cheapest market around the world, but we can do so ahead of time rather than waiting until the middle of a pandemic to do it.
Okay, but before I ask you one more question, and the question is, who impressed you most with leadership? I want to play a clip from last year's panel, because when someone makes a good pick, they deserve to get recognition for that. So here's Andrew.
If I'm judging by the files that she's been handed, I'm going to say Anita Anand, rookie MP, professor of law and private life, now the new Minister of Procurement and Public Services.
There you go, Andrew. Look at you. You have picked someone who, I didn't look at everybody's, all your answers, but that one stood out to my producer, Ariel, because Anand has performed and she has obviously been under a lot of stress to procure. But give me your pick this year, Andrew.
I'm going to say the public health officers. They've been the ones who've been out front. They've become, in some cases, kind of rock stars because they were the ones who had the expertise. And I think it speaks well of our political class that they were willing to put them out front on a lot of these things and not try to grandstand too much. I mean, there's been some of that. But letting the scientists and letting the experts do the talking, I think, is a smart political move, but also a good move in the middle of a crisis when people don't know what to believe.
Best leadership person or thing for you, Chantal?
I went to politicians and I picked a premier. I picked BC Premier John Horgan because the pandemic came early to BC, did well during the first wave, but also managed to have an election in the middle of a pandemic and actually win a majority and still hang on, despite the second wave, to the trust of more people in this province at this juncture, as we tape this, than any other premier in the country. I'd say that's pretty impressive.
Yep, yeah, that's also a good one. Althea, interested to hear your choice.
Yeah, if we're going to stay with the pandemic, I guess we probably should be saying first responders, the doctors and nurses who are handling all these cases in ICUs and hospitals across this country. But my first thought went to politicians as well. And my pick is Mark Miller, actually, which has less to do with the role he's played during the pandemic. But I feel like he's kind of somebody in the Trudeau cabinet that we don't talk enough about. I think that the rail blockades could have been a lot worse early last winter if it wasn't for Mark Miller's style. He's somebody who's very honest and trustworthy. It's very rare that you see a cabinet minister kind of disagree with his colleagues in the middle of a press conference, and we saw that with comments he made about the RCMP's actions out east with regards to the fishermen there. So I've really been impressed by his leadership, and I think we should gold star to Mark Miller.
Okay, we're going to keep all this on tape and we'll check back next year in terms of how you all did. All right, stay with us. We'll be back for another round of At Issue. This time we'll look at some of the other political stories of the year, what didn't get as much attention because of the pandemic. That's coming up next.
Late last night, Iran confirmed that it unintentionally shot down Flight 752. We're working very hard to end the blockades. It's an unacceptable situation. This has been a heartbreaking week for Nova Scotians and for all Canadians.
I'll be stepping down as Finance Minister and as Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre.
Good morning. I'm Aaron O'Toole. You're going to be seeing and hearing a lot from me in the coming weeks and months.
That's just a few of the other big political stories of 2020. Welcome back to another round of At Issue. That would also explain why we all might be tired, because those are all the things that didn't happen around the pandemic. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. A really odd and jam-packed year. Obviously, the pandemic dominated the agenda because of that. Stories that were missed. Let's start with you, Chantal. A political story you think didn't get enough attention this year?
It's not a political story necessarily, but it's the opioid crisis and the debate that was starting to happen about how we handle hard drugs in this country and how we mitigate what is really not a pandemic, but an epidemic. And the numbers, the pandemic have made those numbers worse. And I suspect that debate is waiting for us on the other side of the pandemic, and so it should.
Yep. Althea, a story that we should have talked about more or didn't get talked about enough.
Canadian Armed Forces member tried to kill the Prime Minister. It's still, I find it surprising that you mentioned this and most people are like, oh yeah, I forgot that happened. Or I didn't even realize that happened in July. And it was like a 48 hour story. And we didn't really talk about it, what the impacts are on security at Rideau Hall against the Prime Minister, what changes were made in the forces. Mind-boggling, frankly.
Yeah. Andrew.
I think I say this every year, but I think I have a particular reason to say it this year. Population aging.
You do say it every year, but that's okay. It's still true every year.
Well, a lot of people were reassured.
Yeah.
You know, when we started running deficits of 20% of GDP, people said, well, it's just like World War II. We'll be able to grow our way out of it. Well, after World War II, the economy grew at 5-6% per year after inflation for decades. Well, that's not going to happen this time. The economy is only going to grow by maybe 1.5% per year. So we're not going to be able to grow our way out of this kind of debt. It presents particular challenges. And the really bad news is it's not even the problem at the federal level, as big as the deficits are federal. The real problem is the provinces. Yeah. They are in a terrible fix. The pandemic and the deficits they've had to run has made it worse. But ultimately, there's only one taxpayer. Ultimately, it's the combined debt that matters. And we are in a real pickle.
Yeah, no, listen, that's a fresh point on a perspective you've given us before, so I'll accept it. One thought on sort of the challenge of 2021 or the thing you're going to keep an eye on in 2021, Chantal.
The efficiency of vaccine distribution, obviously. But also, you know, you asked initially one word to describe the year. I'll use a few more. Challenging with a possible federal election on the horizon.
Yeah, okay. Those are all good ones. Althea.
I completely agree. I think the challenge is immunizing most of the population. And I think what to look ahead politically is the possible spring election.
Andrew.
I think the spring budget is going to be one for the ages, for good or ill. It's going to be a huge increase in spending. It's going to have all kinds of momentous policy decisions. It is intended to tee up the election. And it's going to be interesting to see how the official opposition frames its opposition to that. What counter proposals, what contrary vision is it going to offer?
I'm going to offer one too, if I can, because because I'm in charge. I'm going to say the inequities that the pandemic has exposed, the cracks in society, and whether those cracks get fixed or whether we just go on pretending that we didn't see them the first time around. That's something that's a big one, but that's the one I'm going to keep an eye on. Thank you all. Always good to think about the year that was, even like one like this. It has been good to have you with us every Thursday in spite of all of it. Thank you. Happy holidays, and thanks to all of you for watching. At Issue will be back next week. I'll send it back now to Neil in Toronto.
Thanks so much, Rosie. Well, after the break, keeping an ancient tradition alive. We visit the oldest bell-making workshop in the world to hear the story behind that beautiful sound. First, though,
I think we're up to the brim.
On the night before Christmas, this Toronto woman is bringing some cheer to those who have had a long year.
I know someone who's a nurse at St. Joe's, and you know, they're really exhausted. I just felt emotional about it and felt like they really need some support.
With a decorated car and a trunk full of gifts, she's hoping to show some gratitude to those working on the front line.
I hope that they just feel love.
Some were bought by this hometown Santa Claus. Others were donated by local businesses. A way to bring together some of those hardest hit by the pandemic.
Get in touch with me. Thank you very, very, very much. Merry Christmas to you. Happy holidays.
In Toronto tonight, a tribute you may remember from the early days of COVID-19, people banging pots and pans, ringing jingle bells too, to thank frontline workers for the work they've done and are still doing during this pandemic. It is hard to imagine the holiday season without some of that familiar tinkling. Well, one Italian town might be the place that hears the sound of bells more than anywhere else in the world. People there have been making church bells for hundreds of years. Megan Williams takes us there.
Far from the clamor of Rome, Molise, Italy's most remote and desolate region, where the source of the sound that has resonated over the ages is still forged today. Bells, this one tolling each noon for the victims of the latest plague, the coronavirus. Like thousands of others that have rung throughout Italy and around the globe, it was forged here at the Marinelli Foundry, the oldest bell-making workshop in the world. The same family has been making these bronze instruments using the same materials for centuries: clay, wood, wax, bricks, and bronze. The youngest artisan in the family crafts a wax insignia before applying clay over decorative markings to complete the bell mold. I was born inside this workshop, says 28-year-old Ettore, whose father and uncle inherited the foundry from their parents. It's like my future was decided for me. This is my journey. Upstairs, more than 1,000 of what they call sacred bronzes are displayed, the largest collection in the world. Church bells originated in Italy, and the oldest one here dates back to the 10th century. Ettore's uncle Pasquale says the same care goes into the smaller bells made for choirs and musicians. Large ones, weighing hundreds of kilograms, are made with the same techniques from 1,000 years ago. Bells are now exported to Africa, Asia, and South America, where churches are still expanding. Master bellmaker Antonio Degli Quadri tests the musical notes of these bells, achieved through a precise mathematical formula. Bell making, the 83-year-old says, means knowing everything from physics to musical theory and keeping the secrets of the trade tight.
Well, a lot of artisanal traditions, even here in Italy, are going by the wayside. This family says they're confident their tradition will continue.
Artisanal knowledge that's keeping the music of bells alive throughout the world. Megan Williams, CBC News, Agnone, Italy.
Up next for you, a Christmas message from around the world.
Buon Natale.
Frohe Weihnachten, ben op een land die cheats.
Well, we'll tell you how it all started in our moment. Just before she went to bed last night, the host of CBC News Iqalak, Madeleine Alhrialak, decided to wish Twitter a Merry Christmas in Inuktitut, and then wondered how many different places she could get a greeting from in return. By the time she woke up, she had over 1,000 notifications from all over the world. The international outpouring of Christmas spirit is our moment.
I was born and raised in Resolute Bay in the high Arctic, which is the second most northern community. And growing up 24 hours of darkness in the wintertime, you feel so alone and isolated. But Twitter really opened your world. And I was surprised to get responses from as far away as Turkey and Wales and Peru. We're all going through this crazy pandemic. We're all feeling very isolated, no matter where we are in the country, but we still have that Christmas spirit and wishing each other a Merry Christmas.
Frohe Weihnachten, ben op een land die cheats.
Tantissimi auguri di buon Natale e di buon anno da Torino, Italia.
Merry Christmas to all my friends and family in Canada from sunny San Diego, California.
Türkiye'den mutlu Noeller. That's Merry Christmas in Turkish. That is the National for you for this Thursday, December 24th. Thanks, Madeline, for that. That was wonderful. I'm Neil Kirksall. Good night.